Today I'm going to show you how to make cinematic videos on a budget. I'm going to build a sort of importance list of things that have the most impact on the look of your videos. If you're a beginner in video creation and sometimes feel unsure about what actually counts, which investments are worth the money or the time, this video is for you. Let's begin.
I made the call at 9:30 and thought not to ask why.
I often get comments or DMs asking me, for example, which filter I use and such, as if the filter on my lens is what will make the footage look good. However, the filter might only have a very specific and not that impactful effect. But I remember from when I was a beginner that all of these things and tools can get really confusing, so let's work through these one by one and define what will actually make a significant difference. Here's my list of importance with space for each point that we will discuss. So point for point, we're going to rank them. Quick disclaimer, this is of course just my subjective opinion that is based off of objective factors, but in the end it's still just an opinion, not a set rule or a fact. Anyway, let's begin with point number one, which is the obvious central piece of the discussion when talking about video production, the camera. The camera is obviously one of the most important components to make a video. I mean, it's literally the device that records it. And so, of course, it would be really cool to just shoot with an incredible camera like the Sony FX3 or something of that sort. However, that camera is unfortunately very expensive. So when pursuing video production on a budget, how on a budget can one go? Does a mirrorless camera suffice, or can I even just shoot with my phone? This one is actually a bit tricky because the camera is, of course, of great importance and shooting with a better camera will make a difference. However, you can get away with much cheaper cameras to produce good-looking video. I'd say way more important than the camera is the person behind the camera. If you know what you are doing, you can make videos from your phone look good. I'd say the main advantages the camera gives you are the following. A better camera usually has a higher dynamic range. This means you can more easily capture details in both the shadows and the highlights in one shot. However, when shooting with a less capable camera, all you need to do is avoid shooting scenes that require incredible dynamic range. Another advantage of a good camera is the better performance in low-light situations. But here again, if your camera is horrible at shooting in low-light situations, then I think it's best to just accept that as a weakness and focus on the strengths. So don't shoot dark scenes. I'll talk about what to shoot instead later in the video. Something else that relates to this that I was actually just asked recently is whether a camera that only shoots 1080p and no 4K is still usable. That comment was in part what inspired this video because I really want to emphasize points like the following. The resolution really doesn't matter that much. You can absolutely make stunning videos in 1080p, you do not need 4K. As far as I know, even most cinemas don't screen their films in 4K. While I do usually shoot in 4K, back a couple years ago I made this short film in 1080p because I needed to use slow motion and I didn't have a camera that could shoot slow motion in 4K, so I just went with 1080p. The resolution is just the amount of pixels that this image consists of, and it will not have dramatic effects on your colours and such or make your footage look bad or anything. So actually, let's put resolution as its own point on the list. I've placed it here, rather unimportant. One more thing that a better camera can do is simply give you a more pleasing image by using a good picture profile that looks good when colour graded. And also, good cameras tend to give you slightly softer footage that is not over-sharpened. This is something that phones commonly do, and the footage looks overly sharp, which is not that noticeable on the phone's display, but when viewed on a monitor it is very apparent and not particularly pleasant. But even a mirrorless camera like my Lumix GX80 is a little over-sharpened and doesn't have picture profiles. So even using a better camera like the Sony a7 III makes a difference. But is it really that significant of a difference? I'd say yes and no. I personally wouldn't use the Lumix GX80 for professional work that goes to clients, but still you can really push that camera to make fantastic looking stuff with it if you know what you are doing. So let's rank picture profiles, softness and cameras in general on the list. I'd say picture profiles are pretty important, but there are still many factors that will have a much stronger impact on the look of your videos. The softness of your image is also sort of semi-important. It's more of a detail that will make your footage as a whole look better, but bad looking footage will not look better simply because it's softer than if you got the same shot on your phone. So I'll just rank it here. And then the cameras. They are of course super important, however I'm not ranking it that highly in the list because if you have a decent camera, getting an upgrade is not going to magically transform the look of your videos. For example, if you have a Sony a7 III, I think getting a Sony a7 IV will not make a great difference. I'm talking from experience, by the way, as someone who upgraded to the a7 IV just a couple months ago. This, by the way, also applies to color depth. The Sony a7 III can only shoot 8-bit, whereas the Sony a7 IV can shoot 10-bit color. 10-bit color is of course better for color grading, but in my experience it's really not that important, so I'll just rank it here. Next, sticking to the topic of gear still, let's talk about lenses and accessories. My view on lenses is honestly a bit like my views on cameras. They are obviously an important factor. The choice of focal length can be an important artistic choice, and the aperture that a lens allows for gives extra possibilities, such as more light or a shallower depth of field. And some lenses even have cool effects that add a unique character to them. However, just like with cameras, I feel like some people mistakenly think that upgrading their lens will sort of magically make their videos look better, which sadly is not the case. Here's a still frame from a video of mine. Let's do a quick analysis of what the lens contributed to the look. The blurry background is thanks to a combination of the camera's sensor, the focal length, and the aperture. So the lens had a significant impact on this part of the frame. But apart from that, the contrast, the colors, the lighting and such are all things that are important parts of the image that the lens had either no impact on or barely any. So for me, lenses are ranked here. When I said accessories, I meant things like filters. I personally use 2 filters on my Sony, and when I was shooting with my phone in Japan last year, for example, I also used this 2-filter combo on my phone. One of the filters is a Moment CineBloom 10% filter, and this honestly is not important. I really like the added softness that this filter gives my footage, but this little bit of softness is all that the filter does. You can even recreate this to some extent in post-production. So in my opinion, this is very low on my personal ranking of things that actually make a difference. The other filter, on the other hand, is a bit more important, and that is the variable ND filter that I use. By the way, I have links to all of the stuff that I use in my description in case you want to inspect the gear that I use. The ND filter is important in some aspects and absolutely not important in others. There is one simple reason why I use this filter, and that is to get motion blur. Motion blur is this here, movement that appears blurry in frame. To get this blur, you need to set your shutter speed accordingly. When shooting at 25 frames per second, the rule of thumb is to just double that, so I shoot with a shutter speed of 1/50th. If I shoot with a lower shutter speed, the footage can become a bit too blurry, which however can be a cool artistic effect. However, generally I want to avoid shooting with a higher shutter speed because that will give me this choppy look that is not pleasant. So that is what the ND filter is for, because when shooting outside on a bright sunny day, even at f8, the footage is overexposed when I have the shutter speed at 1/50th. That is why I use an ND filter, which reduces the light that enters the camera, a bit like sunglasses. The ND filter generally doesn't have a noticeable effect on the colours or the contrast and such. Its only purpose is to reduce the light so that I can shoot with a 1/50th shutter speed in order to get that smooth motion blur. So for me personally, I rank the ND filter and shutter speed together here, because I think it is quite important and improves your footage a lot. By the way, once you have shot a bunch of videos, and if there are some that you are especially proud of, you should show them off to the world. And for that, YouTube is okay, but a personal portfolio on your own website is definitely better. And for that, I would recommend the sponsor of today's video, which is Squarespace. If you want to make a website, I recommend using Squarespace. I myself have been using Squarespace for over 5 years at this point, and it's perfect for people like me who are creatives but not web developers. They're an all-in-one platform, so with your subscription you can make a website, host your content, register your own domain name, sell products, track analytics, and much more. They have this lovely, intuitive drag-and-drop editor called Fluid Engine, which is so easy to use and lets you customize the layout and design of your page. If you need some help when getting started, you can start off with one of the many professional and beautifully designed templates, which you can then customize to suit your own style. Or you can work with Squarespace's AI, which enables you to build a website in minutes by describing it and answering a few questions. All in all, what I think Squarespace is great at is combining creative freedom with ease of use, which I really appreciate. Try it out for yourself. You can head to squarespace.com for a 14-day free trial, and then when you're ready to launch your website, you can go to squarespace.com/TeoCrawford to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for continuously supporting the channel. Alright, that summarizes the gear part of this video. Now let's move on to some other factors that, in my opinion, have a great impact on your footage. The way you choose to compose your frame and frame your subject will have a great impact on the cinematicness of your video. If you have a great composition, you can use a pretty bad camera and it'll probably still look cool. So I want to emphasize the importance of composition. In fact, this is really high up on my list. However, as you can see, the top 2 spots are still empty. Now, let's talk about those. For me personally, color grading has been a key part of everything I make. Pretty footage can evoke a lot of feelings simply with its looks, and that look is greatly influenced by the color grading. During my time in Japan last year, my main camera was the iPhone 15 Pro. That was possible because despite its weaknesses, the footage is good enough that with some color grading applied, I could achieve an aesthetic that I personally was super happy with. Obviously, whether you think it's any good is a whole other story and subjective to you. But I personally am really satisfied with a lot of the footage I was able to get with just the iPhone 15 Pro and some color grading. But this goes even further. It was back in 2023 in Japan when I first began using my phone as a camera. Back then, however, I was still using the iPhone 11. I just used the normal camera app to film everything and then color graded it in post-production. The footage isn't great in my opinion, and the over-sharpening is quite brutal, but still it's not horrible. This goes to show how far you can push a mediocre or even bad camera with color grading. So for me, this earns the 2nd rank on my list. Even with a bad camera and no ND filter, if you learn to color grade your footage nicely, you can push it a lot. By the way, just so you know, I have a Patreon where I have Lightroom presets and color grading tutorials, even specifically for the iPhone 15 Pro and more stuff like that. If you're interested, there's a link in the description. Anyway, let's talk about the number 1 thing that I rank at the top of the list, and that is lighting. Lighting is everything in my opinion. If you have good lighting, you can shoot some cinematic videos even with a potato cam. However, the opposite is also crucial to understand. If the lighting is bad, or even horrible, the footage is probably going to look bad. It doesn't matter which camera you use or which lens, or even how you color grade the footage. In my experience, you can use color grading to make mediocre footage look pretty good or make good footage look amazing. But I usually cannot make footage that is ugly due to bad lighting look good with just color grading. Maybe this is a skill issue, but I think this is a lighting issue. If the lighting is really bad, the footage is probably going to look bad. And the best way to get pretty looking footage, in my opinion, is to shoot pretty looking things in the first place and shoot them in good lighting. What exactly good lighting is a whole nother topic for another video. I'm afraid it's too much to include that in this video, but here are some examples. Golden hour light, blue hour light, Rembrandt light, backlight, or top light. And there's more, but too much for just this video. One of the most important messages I want to get across in this video is that you should never underestimate good lighting. It is the key and has the most impact on the look of your footage, at least in my opinion. One more point that is closely related to this is location. Sometimes a great location can already do half the work. If you combine a good location with good lighting, you're basically 90% there. So let's add location as a point here.
Don't be a martyr, pray for your brother.
So let's conclude. If you want to shoot cinematic videos on a budget, I would check each point from the top to the bottom in that order. If your camera is no good, the chances are high that you can still get a lot out of it by focusing on good lighting, good locations, good color grading, and get a couple settings right. The rest are details that only make a 1% difference. that's all for today. I hope this could be of any help to you. If I missed something and you have some questions left, just leave them in the comments and maybe someone in the community can help you out, or I will. I'll try to keep up with the comments. Before saying goodbye, I would like to say a massive thank you to the lovely people supporting me and my work on Patreon. Thank you so much to each one of you. If you're interested in Lightroom presets, tutorials and stuff like that, you can check out my page via the link in the description. Also, I have a print shop in case that is of interest to you, also in the description. With that said, I hope to see you again soon. Until then, goodbye.
Hiding in all your shit.